Okay, good morning. Today we begin the fifth chapter of Masechet Chullin. Yesterday we were able to finish the fourth chapter. The fifth chapter is going to address the prohibition of slaughtering an animal and its offspring on the same day. Let me share my screen and we'll get started. Here we go. Okay, so the Mishnah begins. Let's dive right in because again, we're talking about a new topic. There is a prohibition in the Torah to slaughter an animal and its offspring on the same day. We'll see that there's a debate whether this. It seems like it's clear that the does make a difference the gender of the offspring. But in terms of whether it applies to mothers or and fathers or just mothers, that it will be a debate that we will see over the course of today. But in any event, we start with Osova es beno. So this concept of Oto et beno, that it and its offspring are going to be prohibited. This is a pasuk, Vayikra Perak Kav Bet pasuk Kav Chet, which says V'shor oseh, an ox or a seh, which is a sheep or a goat. It's
Emor.
What?
Parshat Emor.
Yes, Parshat Emor, correct. I didn't say anything that contradicted that. Oh, so es beno lo tishchatu b'yom echad. You shouldn't shecht it and its offspring on the same day. So that is the basic of the prohibition. And so that so now the back into the Mishnah, fourth word after the Mishnah begins. No heg, the practice of it applies Bain ba'aretz, bain b'chutz la'aretz. Doesn't matter whether you're in the land of Israel or outside the land of Israel. Bifnei abayit, v'shalo bifnei abayit, whether you're talking about in front of the temple, meaning when the Beit HaMikdash existed or when it doesn't exist. B'chulin doesn't make a difference whether it's sacred ubimukdashin or whether it's unsanctified or sanctified. Doesn't make a difference whether what the nature of the animal is. It's going to apply. Well, Ketzat, how does it apply? So let's get through the basics. Hashochet osova espino. If you have somebody who's shechting both the animal and its offspring, so chulin b'chutz. We're gonna now go through 12 different categories. So if they are both animals are non-sacred animals and it's outside the Beis Hamikdash, shneim ksherim. Both the animals are kosher. Vasheni, and the second slaughterer, Sofeg Eshar Bayim, he receives 40 lashes.
Wow.
Kodshim b'chutz. What if both the animals are sacred and you do it outside the Beis Hamikdash? Harishon chayev kares. The first person who does the shechita is going to be liable for kares, and Rashi tells us why is he liable for kares. It's 1, 2, 3 from the beginning of the perek, counting down in the narrow lines of Rashi. It's 6, 9, 12, 15, 16 lines down. Harishon chayev kares. Mishum shchute chutz. He's not liable because of the Otova Espino. No, we're going to see that only the second person is liable for Otova Espino. When you check the first animal, you haven't done anything wrong. Aval Hasheni Putter Minakares. But what it's highlighting is that the second person, even though we are shechting holy animals outside the Beis Hamikdash, the person who shechs the second animal on that day, because it is the offspring or the mother or the father of this animal, of the first animal, imo, because once you slaughtered the mother, shuv eno ra'oi haben lishchat bifnim. Well, now no longer is, even though it is a sanctified animal, it is not the proper time to slaughter this animal in the Beit HaMikdash. And so as a result, because it's not the proper time to slaughter the animal inside the Beit HaMikdash, we say that you're not going to be liable for slaughtering it outside the Beit HaMikdash. De puzzle mishum mechusar zman. It is invalid as a sacrifice because it is premature. Ve'enu chayev mishum shchutei chutz, and therefore you're not going to be liable for shechting outside the Beis Hamikdash. Ela im kain roi lefnim, because you're only going to be liable for shchutei chutz when it is a sacrifice that could be offered inside the Beis Hamikdash. Tiksiv, because it says in Vayikra, Perek Yud Zayin, V'al the El Pesach Oel Moed Lo Hevio, that if you didn't bring it to the door of the Oel Moed. So what is the implication of that pasuk? Haroi LePesach Oel Moed. It chayavin alav b'schutz. The only time you're going to be liable for bringing an animal outside the Beis Hamikdash is if it was appropriate to have been brought inside. Ve'ilo, lo. And if not, then it's not going to be liable. And so that is why when we checked the mother and child outside, even though both mother and child are both holy, and you do it outside the Beis Hamikdash, only the first person who shechs is going to be subject to kares. Ushneim psulim. But both of the animals, back into the Gemara, we are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines.
Why is it not Rui?
What?
Why is the other one not Rui to be
Because we just said, because the mother had already been shechted. And so because you're not allowed to shecht the mother and child on the same day, this child sacrifice is not appropriate to bring today.
But isn't that the halacha we're trying to learn, that you're not, that is a mafarish pasuk, right?
Yes, 100%. And what we're learning right now is the fact that not only is it prohibited, but it undermines the ability to offer it as a sacrifice. And so as a result, any sacrifice where you've already offered either the mother or child on that day is not going to be a valid sacrifice, because that animal is not appropriate to be brought in the Beis Hamikdash. And so that's why if you bring it outside the Beis Hamikdash, you're not going to be liable for shchutei chutz, because you didn't actually shecht something that could have been brought today in the Beis Hamikdash. Okay? So ushneim, now first words on the 6th line of the parak. Ushneim psulim, both animals are invalid because they're not kosher, because in some ways they're not kosher as a sacrifice, they're invalid as a sacrifice, and they're not kosher to eat because they're both supposed to be holy, but you slaughtered them not in the right place, even if the second person isn't going to get kares because of it. Ushnei and Sofkim Netzar Bayim, and both of them are going to get 40 lashes. Now, why does the first person get 40 lashes? Obviously, the second person is getting 40 lashes because they violated Osov Espino. But why is the first person? Harishon Chayev Kares, Rashi, Ushneihen Sofkin. Both of them are going to be getting lashes. Harishon Mishum Lab Deshchutei Chutz. The first one is getting the lashes because of slaughtering outside the Beis Hamikdash. And when you're subject to the penalty of kares, you're going to get lashes. Okay, back into the Gemara.
How do we explain the Mishnah? The Mishnah starts out with Noeg Oto Bebeno Noeg Bein Ba'aretz Bein Chutz La'aretz. So B'chutz La'aretz, isn't that Shchutei Chutz?
No. Chutz La'aretz means that if you were to do this today, if you had a mother and child today and you went out and decided that you wanted to shech both of them, you would be violating this prohibition, even though you live in the United States.
Right. So, but that's b'shchutei chutz, isn't it? There's no misbeh.
No, we're talking about it applies even if the animal is a Chullin animal.
So okay, even if it's Chullin.
Yeah,
so
that's what we're saying right now. Right? We just did, our case number 1 was where you slaughtered Chullin animals outside the Beis Hamikdash. Case number 2, which we just finished, is both holy animals outside the Beis Hamikdash. We are going to go through 12 different permutations. So the next permutation is Chullin Bifnim. What happens if you have 2 non-sacred animals, and now you slaughter them both inside the Beis Hamikdash? Well, let's take a look, and we'll see what happens. So we're now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines down. First words on the line. If you slaughter Chullin Bifnim inside the Beis Hamikdash, Shneim Psulim, both animals are unfit, and Rashi tells us, in fact, it probably pays to keep a finger on Rashi right now. Chullin Bifnim, it's the next Rashi. Shneim Psulin, Mishum Chullin Shenishchatu Ba'azara, because they are non-sacred animals that you slaughtered in the courtyard, and that results in them being non-edible for anybody. Vasheni sofek ezar bayim. Back into the Gemara, the second person gets lashes. And Rashi tells us, next Rashi, Vasheni Sofig, Mishum Oto Vespino. He gets lashes because it and its child. Aval Mishum Chullin Shenishchatu Bazara. But when it comes to slaughtering a non-sacred animal inside the Beis Hamikdash, Azhara Dilahi, the warning that's associated with it is Ki Yarchak V'Zavakta Birachok Makom Atazoveach. Below Bakirav Makom. So the point is that we learn from this that it's only a violation of an implication of a positive commandment, that when you're supposed to that when you're far away from the Beis Hamikdash and you then offer a sacrifice. So when you're far away, that's when you slaughter the animal, and not when you're close. Meaning, if you have a profane animal, you should only slaughter it when you are far away from the Beis Hamikdash. And so here you slaughtered it inside the Beis Hamikdash. That's just an implication of the pasuk that you violated. So while you're violating a Torah prohibition, because even Torah prohibitions include the implications, but you're not going to get lashes for it. And so that's why only the person who violated Otova et Beno will get lashes, not both of them, despite the fact that they slaughtered Chulin inside the Beis HaMikdash. Wow. Kodshim Bifnim, next case number 4.
What do you mean by the implication? Imply means like one infers from something, infers the opposite of imply. What are we implying here?
We're implying the fact that you're not allowed to sacrifice profane animals inside the Beis Hamikdash, because the Torah tells us that if you are far away from the Beis Hamikdash, that's where you should slaughter profane animals. The implication of that is that if you slaughter a profane animal inside the Beis Hamikdash, you're violating the Torah.
Oh, okay.
Okay, Kodshim Bifnim, next category. If you're slaughtering holy animals inside the Beis Hamikdash, Harishon Kasher or Pater. Well, the first person who slaughters is completely exempt, and the animal is totally kosher and can be offered as a sacrifice because you're slaughtering it in the right location. Vasheni sovegas harbayim upasol. But the second person, even though it's a holy animal and it's slaughtered in the right place, technically, because the mother or child was slaughtered first, now this animal is no longer capable of being slaughtered. As we say, Kodshim Bifnim, next Rashi, Hasheni Sofeg Mishum Oto Ve'espeno. He gets punished because of the penalty of Oto Ve'espeno. You can't slaughter them on the same day. Upasol, and it's invalid as a sacrifice, Mishum Mechusar Zman, because it's premature. You can't sacrifice it. You have to wait until tomorrow in order to sacrifice it. Okay, next category, 5, Chulin v'kachim b'chutz. If you have one animal is unsanctified when the other one is sanctified, and you're doing it outside the Beis Hamikdash, harishon kasher or pater. Well, the first person and the first animal are all good. Vasheni sovek asarbayim upasol. Whereas the second one is all bad because you slaughtered a holy animal outside the Beis Hamikdash, so therefore it's not good as a sacrifice, and you sacrificed the child or the mother, and so as there is after the other one was already sacrificed, and so you get lashes for that because you violated Otovat Beno. Kachim b'chulin b'chutz. If the first one is holy and the second one is unsanctified, so then harishon chayav karis upasol. The first one is only subject to karis because they shechted a holy animal outside the Beis Hamikdash. And puzzle, and the animal is going to not be valid as any kind of sacrifice because it was sacrificed out. It was slaughtered outside the Beis Hamikdash. V'hasheni kasher, and the second animal is totally kosher. You're allowed to eat it. However, ushneim sofkim es arbaim. Both people are going to get the 40 lashes. The first person because of shchutei chutz, the second because of oto ve'espeno. Chulin v'kachim bifnim. If you have again, now we go back to the prior order. You have an unsanctified and a sanctified animal slaughtered in that order, and now they're being slaughtered in the Beis Hamikdash. Shneim psulim. Well, then they are both going to be unfit. the first one is going to be unfit because you sacrifice it inside the Beis Hamikdash. The second one, because it's Chullin. The second one is going to be unfit as a sacrifice because and unfit to eat because it's a holy animal. And although you sacrifice it in the right location, it was mechusar zman because you needed to wait until tomorrow because its mother or child was already sacrificed. And so the second person will get lashes, even though the first one is unfit. Also, the first animal is unfit because Chullin inside the Beis Hamikdash is not subject to lashes. That's why, and it's only just a prohibition that's implied from a positive commandment. So therefore, you're not going to get lashes, even if you did something wrong. Kachim v'chulim b'fnim. Next case, number 8. If you have a holy animal and then a unholy animal, and you do it in that order, and you do it inside the Beis Hamikdash, harishon kasher upater. Well, in the first one, everything was right. It's a holy animal that you sacrifice inside the Beis Hamikdash in the courtyard, and so everything is good. So that will be valid, and of course there won't be any liability for the slaughterer. V'asheni sofek esar bayim upuzzle. Whereas the second person, because of otov es beno, and it's chulin, it's going to be invalid to eat. And it's going to be the person who slaughters it is going to get 40 lashes. Chullin b'chutz u'bifnim. Now we have what happens if part is done inside the Beis Hamikdash and part is done outside the Beis Hamikdash. So if both animals are chullin and they're done, one is done outside the Beis Hamikdash and one is done inside the Beis Hamikdash in that order, harishon kasher upater. The first one is everything is fine because it's a chullin animal and it's done outside, so everything is wonderful and therefore you can eat it. Ba'asheni sofek esabayim upuzzle. Whereas the second one, because you now did it in the Beis Hamikdash, it's not going to be edible because you did it in the Beis Hamikdash, and you're going to get lashes because you're going to have violated the otov et beno. Kachim b'chutz u'bifnim. If you have, instead of being unsanctified animals, now both animals are sanctified, and you do the first one outside the Beis Hamikdash and second one inside the Beis Hamikdash. Well, the first one that you did outside the Beis Hamikdash, harishon chayav kares. You sacrificed a holy animal outside the Beis Hamikdash. You're subject to kares for doing so. So ushneim sofkim esarbayim, and both of the slaughterers are going to get lashes. Why are they going to get lashes? Sorry for not scrolling. Now we're on item number 10 on our list. Why are they going to get lashes? Because they're going to get lashes because the first one's getting lashes because he's subject to the kares penalty, and the second one's getting lashes because of otov et beno, ushneim psulim, and you cannot eat either of them. You can't eat the first one because it's kodesh that was slaughtered outside, and you can't eat the second one because even though it was kodesh that was slaughtered inside the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore maybe you should think that it would be a fine sacrifice. But no, it's not a fine sacrifice because it was mechusar zman. It's premature. You have to wait until tomorrow in order to slaughter it. And since you slaughtered it today, it's not going to be kosher as a sacrifice. It's totally invalid. Case number 11, chulin bifnim u'bachutz. Again, we have now both animals are unsanctified, and we do one outside, one inside, and one outside. So now what happens? So hasheni sovek es harbayim. Harishon pasol upater. The first one is going to be invalid because it was slaughtered. The first one was chulin that was slaughtered inside upater, and there's no liability associated with it because even though you violated a Torah prohibition, it's not a direct negative commandment, and therefore it's not subject to 40 lashes. So that's why you're not going to get lashes. But the second one, when it comes to the second one, which is chulin and slaughtered outside, hasheni sofek es harbayim, that person's going to get lashes because he violated otov et beno, but he slaughtered a chulin animal outside, and the act of doing and this is very important, the act of doing otov et beno does not result in the animal being not kosher. The animal is kosher. That was the very first principle, again, that we had in the very first case. Remember that the first case, which dealt with chulin b'chutz, we said that both animals are able to be eaten. Even though the second animal was slaughtered improperly and a person who did the slaughtering is getting 40 lashes, he's not, the animal itself can still be eaten. Last case, kachim bifnim uvachutz. If you have a holy animal that's slaughtered inside and then another holy animal that's slaughtered outside. And again, it's mother and child, or father and child, again, according to the different opinions, or child and parent. Harishon kasher upater. The first one, well, they're both, it's kachim. The first one is kachim, and it's slaughtered inside the Beis Hamikdash. So everything is correct with respect to it. And so as a result, there's no liability, and it's going to be a valid sacrifice. Vasheni, Sobek Arbayim Mupassel. Whereas the second one that's slaughtered, because of Otova Espino, it's not going to be, the person's going to get 40 lashes. And because it's Kudshim that was slaughtered outside the Beis Hamikdash, it's going to be unfit. He can't eat it. Now, because it's Kudshim sacrificed outside the Beis Hamikdash, maybe you might think, well, he should also get the penalty of kares. And again, the answer is because the sacrifice is mechusar zman, because it's not the right time to slaughter this animal, because its mother or child was already slaughtered here, and therefore it's not considered offering a holy sacrifice outside the Beis Hamikdash, because as we saw in one of the first Rashis we did today, that only if you slaughter an animal that could have been brought today in the Beis Hamikdash outside the Beis Hamikdash, that's the only time that you will get kares for bringing a sacrifice outside the Beis Hamikdash. And so that completes our Mishnah. And now we're going to pick up with the Gemara. The Gemara is quoting a brisa.
Just have a question.
Sure, please, go ahead.
We learned that a ben pakua is pater from shchita. Now, now that's pater, there's no chiyuv in shchita. You can kill it any way you want. But suppose he decided to shecht it, would he be chayiv here for a ben otov beno in the same day?
I believe that we are going to see. I believe that issue will come up in this parak. I'm only a daf ahead, so I can't, and I haven't learned all of Chullin before. So my apologies for not knowing all of the details. But I believe that we are going to see that, in fact, because it isn't subject to requiring slaughtering, a ben pekua is not going to be subject to the prohibition of otova et beno. It is only a child that is effectively born that is subject to otova et beno, not a child that is removed from the mother after slaughter.
Maybe you could learn a svara that it's a yerech imo. So that's really part of the mother, and then it certainly wouldn't be.
You're absolutely right, and indeed, I believe the Rambam paskins yerech imo. So you're absolutely right. You can, that would be a reason to also say that it's, and I think that is an element of the reason that otova et beno would not apply to it. So I agree with you completely. You don't have to say yerech imo in order to reach that conclusion, but I do agree with you that it is supportive of yerech imo on that basis. Okay, so let's take a look. The Gemara quotes a brisa that provides the basis to apply the prohibition of otova et beno, whether or not the animal is sanctified. So Tana Rabbanan, let's learn a brisa. Mnayin o otova et beno shenoeg b'kmukdashin. How do I know that otova et beno applies to kodesh animals? Talmud Lomar, so shor o kesev o ez ki valed. Now this is the pasuk before the pasuk. This is Vayikra Perek Kafet pasuk Kav Zayin. And what does it say there? The pasuk in complete says the following: Shor o kesev o ez ki valed v'hayashiv as yamim tachas imo u'miyom hashmini v'hala yeratzeh lekarbani shel Hashem. And basically, the pasuk is telling us that when you have an ox, a sheep, or a goat that's born, you can only offer it as a sacrifice to Hashem from the 8th day on. And so, as a result, the context of the immediately preceding pasuk is sacrifices, ksiv basrei. And in the next pasuk, that's the pasuk that says, "V'shor oseh osov es bido lo tishkatu b'yom echad." You shouldn't shecht a mother and child on the same day. So limeid, that teaches us al otova es beno shenoeg b'mukdashin. The juxtaposition tells us that osov es beno also applies to kodesh. So the Gemara now asks on this brisa, ve'emim b'mukdashin in b'chulin lo. Well, let's go so far. You made a great argument The fact that it seems like this is supposed to be a holy animal from the prior pasuk, so maybe we should say that it only applies to holy animals. No, sure, hifzika inyan. Well, what did the we because the second of the psukim, which begins shor o kesef o a, I'm sorry, which begins vishor o se o tov et beno lo sishkatu b'yom echad. It did if it was talking about the same animals as the last pasuk. We could have just said osova espino lo shkatu b'yom echad. Why does it say the shore to start starting essentially a new sentence, a new concept? Hifsi ka'inyan. That creates a pause and says that we need to talk about something new. As Rashi tells us, second to last line in Rashi on Daf Ayin Chedem and Aleph. De'i akamai kai, because if the prohibition of oso b'no was on everything in the prior verse, nishtok, it should be quiet in this verse. The nichtav, and it should just write v'otov espino, and continuing v'otov espino lo shishkatu b'yom echad, and its offspring you should not slaughter on one day. Dehab b'shor u'b'seh Iri Lael, because we were already talking about those same animals. Because a seh is just the same thing as a kesef or a's. So as a result, it could have just referred back to the same animals that were being referred to in the prior pasuk. The fact that we created a new reference, that teaches us this idea. Well, 1 second. Well, maybe the fact that we start a new sentence and we say sure, that tells us that we need to start a new concept, and the juxtaposition that we tried to make is an invalid juxtaposition. No, it's valid because of the following. Ksiv vishor, the Torah says vishor, the second pasuk, parak kafbet, pasuk kafchet, begins vishor with an and. Vav Mosif al Inyan Rishon. So the Vav is telling us that you have to continue at least an element of what we had before. And so as a result, given the fact that Parakaf Bet Pasuk Kav Zayin is about sacrifices, so as a result, even though we started a new topic, and therefore it's going to definitely be about Chullin animals, it's also a continuation of the topic, and therefore it's also about sanctified animals. So, ima kodshim kulayim lo. Well, 1 second. Maybe just as kulayim does not apply to kodshim, meaning that a kulayim animal is not able to be offered as a sacrifice. If you have a mixture of two animals, it's not going to be kosher as a sacrifice. Avotov has been kulayim lo. Maybe we should also say that it and its offspring, the prohibition does not apply to kulayim animals. So alama tanya, and yet we have a brisa that says the following: Osova espino noheg b'chlayim uvekoi. That when it comes to a kulayim animal, which is a hybrid animal between two different other breeds, and a koi, which is a animal that has elements of a wild animal, a behema and a chaya, a domesticated animal and a wild animal. Both of them have the prohibition, and they're both, we're talking about obviously a kosher version, or even, a kosher version. It's going to have the prohibition of otovet beno. That's what a brisa teaches. V'od se ksiv. Moreover, the word se is written in the pasuk, right? It says shor o se, the shor o se. So v'amar Rava, and Rava teaches, as we turn to Ayin Chedem a bet, ze vana av, that the word se creates a binyan av for us. Kol makom shene'amar se einu ela lahotzi es haklayim. That anywhere where it says se, it's supposed to exclude klayim. So this is Rashi explains what's this question. Va'od, top of Ayin Chedem a bet, even though this Rashi technically should be on the prior daf. Kashali Allah, it's difficult. I have another question on this brisa. Dahadikatani noag b'klayim, because the brisa says that klayim applies to hybrid animals, And yet, Rava is telling us that the word seh comes to exclude hybrid animals. So how can we understand this? So we've got a couple of questions. Question number one is maybe we should use kudshim as a basis to say that osoves beno should not apply to that osoves beno should not apply to hybrid animals, just as hybrid animals cannot be sanctified for the Beis Hamikdash to bring as sacrifices. And on the other hand, and or supporting that is Rava's statement that in general, whenever it says seh, it does not include hybrid animals. And our pasuk that of Osoves Beno references seh. So maybe we should say it doesn't include hybrid animals. And yet, on the other hand, competing with that is the fact that we have a brisa that says it explicitly does apply to hybrid animals, the prohibition of Osoves Beno. So how can we understand all of these different things? Amar Kra, the Torah says, oh. So it doesn't just say seh. It says vishor oseh. The fact that it has the word or there between them and is an addition, is suggesting something else. L'rabos es a klayim, and it's coming to teach us that also klayim are applied in this law. And so, yes, it is true that Rava would say that generally said does not include a hybrid animal, but if you have the word or there, then that prohibition can include a hybrid animal.
But what would be an example? The classic example of a hybrid is a mule, and a mule is sterile. So how could it even have otovet beno?
Well, we are going to see that we're going to talk about what happens if you want to slaughter the the mother of the mule and the mule, right? So that the point is that you can have otovet beno, including a mule, where one of the animals is and so usually we're talking about a sheep and a goat, and even if the offspring of that relationship ends up being sterile, so then it is that's still going to be covered with the beno aspect of it. So okay. So, but the problem now we're going to ask, this was all dependent on using the O to teach us, the word O, or to teach us that it comes to include klayim, but hi O mi ba'ile l'chalek. But we need O in order to differentiate and tell us, Desalka daitakamina adashachet shor ubeno v'seh ubeno lo mechayev. I might have thought that you needed to slaughter both an ox and its offspring along with a seh and its offspring in order for one to be liable. Kamash Malan, that's how the Torah teaches. So it comes to teach us with the word or that it's not. You can do either of them. So no, that is not true. L'chalek, how do we get the distinction? It's not based on the word o, rather mibino nafka. Bino is singular. And so as a result, the fact that it says its offspring, that's enough to tell us that we're talking about slaughtering either an ox and its offspring or a seh and its offspring, not both of them together. But when second, we still need the word o, like we teach in the following brisa, ilunem arshev shor viseh ubeno. If the Torah had just said the word shor and a seh and its offspring, I might have thought, Hayiti Omer, I would have said, Ad sheyishchot shor viseh ubeno, that you need to slaughter three animals. You need to slaughter an ox, you need to slaughter a seh, and you need to slaughter the offspring of one of them. And only then would you be liable. Talmud Lomar, shor oseh oso ve'espeno. That's why the Torah says shor, and right now we're assuming o or a seh, oto ve'espeno. So that's why it says my lav mi o nafkale. Aren't we learning in this brisa from the word or? And so that word or is already being used and therefore cannot be used to teach us that in fact a seh that the seh that the animals that are covered by otovet beno include hybrid animals. Lo, no, me oto. We are learning it from the word oto. Oto is again also singular, and so as a result, this brisa is also consistent with the concept. So again, we need the word beno in order to teach us that you don't need to have both an ox and its offspring and a seh and its offspring. And we need the oto in order to teach us that it's not three animals, a shor, a seh, and one of their offspring. And so and then we still have the word o in order to teach us that it also includes a hybrid animal. Well, oto. That works when it comes to the rabbis because they say that the word oto is still extra. But what about Chananya? He doesn't think that the word oto is extra. As we are going to see at the very end of today, he thinks that he notes that their oto is used for a different purpose. So how does he understand it? L'cholek minale. How does he differentiate between an ox and a seh? Meaning, why doesn't he require three animals to violate this prohibition? An ox, a seh, and one of their offsprings. So l'chalek lo tzarakra, because he says that you don't need any kind of word in order to differentiate an ox and a seh, to say that it really means or. To Sabarla, Rabbi Yonatan, he agrees with Rabbi Yonatan. As we're going to see, let's take a look in Rashi. We'll do the Rashi on this, Rabbi Yonatan. 3, 6, 9, 12, 15 lines down in the Rashi on Ayin Chedom Abed, Rabbi Yonatan. Da'amar, because what does Rabbi Yonatan say? Afal gafta lo ksiv o, even though it doesn't, even when the Torah doesn't use the word or, command ksiv o, it's as if the Torah wrote or dummy. It's as if. So v'chol hecha deksiv ploni viploni oh hi mashma. Anytime where it says A and B, it means or either A or B is implied. And so as a result, there's a very interesting rule in connection with legal contracts as to whether when and could mean or and can mean and or, etc. So it's a very the Torah is foreseeing legal concepts that we actually apply even today as to whether an and can imply or. But in any event, the bottom line is that Rabbi Hananya would hold like Rabbi Yonatan and say that it's naturally separated. And so as a result, he doesn't need the word oto for that purpose because he's going to use that oto for a different purpose. Titania. So
how can we say, is that true today that and can mean or in legal documents?
It depends on the context. Depends on the context. But often, the question, it depends on the context. Titania, ish asher yikalel et aviv et imo. So how do I know that Rabbi Yonatan says that it means or? Because listen to this brisa. When a person is going to curse his father and his mother, and there it says ve'et imo, so it's an and, ainli ela avivimo. I would only know from this pasuk that it means that you have to curse both of them. Aviv shalo imo, the imo shalo aviv minayin. How about the father without the mother and the mother without the father? How do I know that that's also prohibited? Talmud Lomer. Well, then we have the end of that same pasuk, which it says aviv v'imo kilel. It reverses. No, it has the same word. He has cursed his father and mother, and so as a result, aviv kilel v'imo kilel. It doesn't make a difference which one goes first. That either one is cursing is sufficient. So that because those words weren't necessary, Divrei Rabbi Yoshia. That's what Rabbi Yoshia says. What does Rabbi Yonasan say? And again, Rabbi Yonasan's the one who's going to say that the can mean or. Rabbi Yonasan Omer, mashma shneim ke'echad. It implies both at the same time. Both of them, mashma shneim ke'echad. It implies both of them cursing both of them. Umashma echad b'fnei atzmo. And it implies each of them individually. Ad sheyifrot l'cha hakasav yachtav. Until the Torah actually uses the word together, meaning that it has to be both of them at the same time, then it doesn't necessarily imply that you have to do both. And so as a result, it is only, for example, where it says in Dvarim Perakaf Bet, Lo Sacharosh B'Shor Uvachamor Yachdav, then that means that you can't plow with an ox and a donkey together. That's when you have yachtav, that means it's both of them at the same time. When you don't have yachtav, then it would mean if you only had lo sacharosh b'shor uvachamor, it would not mean that you can't plow with them at the same time. It would mean that you can't plow with them even individually. And so as a result, it's only when you have the word yachtav. And again, similarly in contracts, usually in order to support the concept that and is a requirement, you would include other wording in the contract in order to make clear that the and in that context means all of them and not just one of them. Okay, umay Chananya, my Rabbanan. So we referenced the statements of Chananya and the rabbis saying that they disagree with respect to whether or not Oto is needed in the pasuk. But what is that a reference to? So Titania. So we have a brisa, and this brisa will be the end of today's daf, and that will conclude our learning and wishing everybody a good Shabbos. So let's take a look. Titania. O tova et beno noheg b'nekevos. This is the concept that we had that I mentioned at the very beginning. Do we say that this prohibition applies to female animals and their offspring, or both to male and female animals and their offspring? So, oso vespino noheg b'nekevos. When it comes to the prohibition of it and its offspring, it applies to female animals basically it applies to mothers. Ve'eno noheg b'scharim, and it does not apply to fathers. Chananya Omer noheg bein b'scharim ubein nekevos. You know what? It applies both to fathers and to mothers. So my time at the Rabbanon. Okay, so that's the debate. But we now have to see what's the basis of that debate, and that the basis of that debate will show that the oto is used by Chananya and not by the rabbis. So let's see how we get there. So my time at the Rabbanan, what's the reasoning of the rabbis who say that it only applies to mothers and not to fathers? Yachol yehei oto ve'et beno noheg bein b'scharim bein b'nekevos. I might have thought that it applies to both fathers and mothers. V'dinhu, and indeed, there's a logic to say that it would apply to fathers. I'm sorry, no, and there's a logic to say that, but you know what? There's a logic to say that it would apply to mothers and not fathers. V'dinhu chayev kan v'chayev be'em al habanim. There's an obligation here with respect to children, parents and children, and there's an obligation in another context with respect to mothers and children. That when it comes to a mother nest, shiluach haken, then that is going to apply only to mother birds. So masha keshachie be'em al habanim b'nekevot uvelo zcharim. It's only with respect to mother birds and their offspring, not with respect to father birds and their offspring. So maybe I would say that we have a logic that says that similarly here, in connection with Hotovet Beno, Benekevot, Velobischarim. It should be just with females and not with males. And so as a result, maybe I would use that as the basis to respond, but that's not a good response. Low.
In the beginning, when you read the beginning of the bright, it said, now, I thought you said that the logic would be it would apply to fathers and not to mothers, but the Gemara seems to say it could apply to both mothers and to fathers.
Correct. So let's start with the following. Initially, the Brisa starts out by saying, I might have thought it would apply to both. And then it says, you know what? I'll give you a logic that says that it shouldn't apply to both. And then we're going to reject that logic, and we're going to come up with an alternative explanation for why it doesn't apply to both. So you are absolutely right. This is a very confusing Brisa. Again, it starts by saying, I might have thought that it applies to both. And in the end, the Tana Kama of this Brisa, and the only Tana in this Brisa, is going to say it does not apply to both. It only applies to mothers. But we're going to first try to bring one explanation for why it applies to mothers. We're going to reject that explanation, and then we're going to come up with a second explanation for why it applies to mothers. So again, first we say maybe it should apply to men and to fathers and mothers. But there's this logic that says maybe it should only apply to mothers because maybe we should analogize it to shiluach haken, and as a result, that should be the paradigm, and that only applies to mothers, and therefore this should also only apply to mothers. But it's not a good paradigm basis because amarta be'aim al habanim. When it comes to the mother and the offspring, with respect to shiluach hakan, shekain lo asava mezuman kishe'eno mezuman. That is a very unique situation because when does shiluach hakan apply? And it is a debate as to whether it should be shiluach haken, shiluach hakan. In any event, my apologies for those who have a better understanding of Ivrit diction as to which one it should be, and if I'm switching from back and forth. In any event, so you have the sending away of the mother bird. That only applies when you come upon the mother bird. It's you happen upon the mother bird, and so as a result, only in that situation is it going to apply the prohibition. But when you have raised the mother bird, when it's your nest and you've facilitated the growth of that nest, so you knew the nest was there, it was not a happenstance that you came upon it, you grew them. In that situation, the prohibition does not apply. So as a result, Tomar ba'oto b'no, can you then use the concept of shiluach hakan, which only applies to mothers, to say anything about oto b'no? Oto b'no applies she'asa bo mezuman kishe'enan mezuman. It doesn't make a difference whether these two animals were grown by you or you happened upon them. Whatever the situation is, you cannot slaughter the parent and child at the same time. And so as a result, we cannot use the mother bird situation to learn to the oto b'no situation. So Talmud Lomar, so as a result, we have another reason. What Talmud Lomar? Oto. Echad v'lo shtayim. That when it says oto, it means one and not two. So as a result, achar, but, so that, given the fact that it means one and not two, so that basis, and achar shechilek hakasav zachisi ladin. So now that we say that it means one, that oto suggests only a single parent and not both of the parents, well, now we have to ask which parent does it refer to? So achar shechilek hakasav zachisi ladin. Well, now that we have a distinction and we have a basis in the Torah to say that only one parent has the rule of oto b'no, well, chiyav kan v'chiyav kan be'eim al banim. So now we have two prohibitions. So who cares that they're not completely comparable and that one applies whether or not the mother and child are prepared ahead of time, and one only applies if you happen upon them and not if you prepare them ahead of time? It doesn't make a difference. We're just trying to find any logical basis to say that it applies, whether it applies to the mother or the father. And so given the fact that we have another prohibition that's very similar that applies to the mother, we'll say that this one also applies to the mother. So makashiv be'em al banim b'nekevas v'lo b'scharim, afkashiv kan b'nekevas v'lo b'scharim. We'll also say here it applies to mothers and not to fathers. Be'im nafshacha lamar. And if you want, you could also add the following: b'no, that it's offspring. What does that mean? Mi sheb'no karuch acharav. Who does the offspring connect to? Who does it cling to? Who is the caring parent? Yatza Zachar. Unfortunately, that it excludes the male, it excludes the father. She'ein b'no karuch acharav. That in general, in the animal kingdom, the baby animals follow their mothers. So now the Gemara asks the following question on the brisa. So that's the brisa that explains the rabbis. So ma'im nafshecha lamar. What does it mean if you desire to say? Why do we need that? V'chitema oso zachar mashma. Once you tell me that oso implies I'm sorry. This is the answer already. V'chitema oso zachar mashma. Because you might say the following. You know what? Maybe oto implies maleness because oto is a masculine form. So harehu omer b'no. That's why the Torah says b'no. Misha beno karuch acharav. Yatza zachar she'ein beno karuch acharav. And so as a result, when we say oto, even though it's a masculine, the vav in the oto is masculine and suggests that it's a masculine parent. No, that's not a definitive proof because the gender in the Torah is not always specific. And therefore, when it says beno, it implies an animal that the offspring goes after it. And who does the offspring go after? It goes after the mother, not the father. And so as a result, the fact that it's singular tells us it's only one parent, and therefore the singularity tells us that, and the connection tells us that it must be only the mother. And now, top of Ayin Terem at Aleph, Chananya. What about Chananya? Remember, he's the one that we now need to find the word oto. The whole point of our bringing this is to show that Chananya uses the word oto, whereas the rabbis don't need the word oto and are able to use the word oto in order to teach us that it comes to include, that oto comes to tell you that even if it's just that it's not, that three animals is not, you don't need to slaughter three animals to violate the prohibition, because remember, we have the word beno to teach us the fact that, of course, because beno is also singular, so as a result, we know that it doesn't mean a shore and its offspring and a seh and its offspring, but now we need, what about maybe it could mean a shore and a seh and one of their offspring? So that's how we use the word oto, and that left us with the word o still to teach us the fact that o means that it comes to include hybrid animals. But now we're going to see that Chananya uses that word oto. So here's how he uses it. Chananya ksiv oto. It says oto demashma zachar. He uses that to say that's how we know that a father is going to be included. Uksiv beno. And the Torah writes beno, misha beno karuch acharav, which teaches us that the child is going to cling to. So demashma nekeva, which implies the mother. So Hilkach noheg bein bischarim bein benekevos. So that's how he knows that it applies both to male parents, both to fathers and to mothers, and so as a result, that's why he doesn't have the word oto left over, and so as a result, he doesn't have the word o left over, because he needs the word o to tell us that it's either a shore and its offspring, or it's a seh and its offspring, and it's not necessarily a shore and a seh and one of their offspring. And so as a result, he doesn't have the word o to tell us the fact that even hybrid animals are covered. And so as a result, that's why we answer that it must be that Chananya holds like Rabbi Yonatan, that just as Rabbi Yonatan says that even shore viseh would mean either a shore or a seh, and so as a result, he therefore does not need the word o for that concept. So as a result, he can use the word o as we are using it, as everybody is now using it, in order to tell us that even hybrid animals are subject to the prohibition of oto ve'et beno. So how does the Gemara rule? Does the Gemara rule like the rabbis or Chananya? So for the answer to that question, you'll have to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. Wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom. Have a great Shabbos, everyone.